thankfully. It raises the complexity of this. There are 2 billion Muslims in the world.
This clip is Piers Morgan versus Mosab Hasan, the ex-Muslim pro-Israel commentator, in a heated post-Sydney attack discussion. The debate revolves around Islam versus Islamism, collective blame, Jewish fear, and whether Islam itself is the problem or whether extremist interpretations are being weaponized. Piers Morgan is playing referee, pushing back against blanket accusations. Mosab is on offense, arguing Islam is fundamentally incompatible with modern pluralism. By the end, Piers clearly gains ground, exposing contradictions and forcing Mosab into philosophical gymnastics to defend his absolutist stance. This is a clash between nuance and ideology, and the cracks show.
And 15 million Jews. A massive disparity in the numbers there. People keep telling me a lot of Muslims agree with these Islamists. A lot of Muslims share this feeling. Instinctive response is, well, if that is the case, if even you had 10% of the world's Muslims who felt that way, that's 200 million people.
This is Piers' strongest opening move, and it immediately undermines Mosab Hasan doomsday framing. The math matters. If Islam itself were inherently violent in practice, the world would already be unlivable. This exposes the first double standard. Mosab Hasan acknowledges most Muslims are peaceful, but then refuses to let that reality matter. You don't get to say, most Muslims don't want violence, and then turn around and argue Islam is the problem, without explaining why lived reality contradicts doctrine so consistently. That contradiction never gets resolved.
So there would be these atrocities happening all the time. And in fact, I would go further and say that about 80 to 90% of all the victims of Islamist terrorism are fellow Muslims, right? So some people with their own agendas like to portray this issue. What do you feel about the reality here? How many of the Muslim population do you think share a hatred of Jews, for example? How many would have sympathy with Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis or ISIS or whatever it may be? What is the reality here? Because if it was hundreds of millions, I would just assume the whole planet would be in flames all the time, and it's not. And I feel very strongly for Muslim friends of mine that I know, that every time one of these things happen, everyone wants to tar the whole religion with the same brush of extremism, which we don't do with other religions when people do it in, if they're extreme Christians or Hindus or whatever it may be. It's not the same rule applied. So what do you feel about that?
First of all, speaking of a father and son, as you know, my father wanted me to follow his footsteps of becoming a Hamas terrorist, basically. And this is when I dropped that idea, and I went against the interest of the family. I was born a Muslim myself. I studied Islam, I studied classic Arabic, I memorized huge portions of the Quran. I prayed to Allah 5 times a day. I was a devout Muslim. I studied the Islamic law. But at some point, I realized that it was a dead end, leading to more violence, and that nothing could satisfy the Islamic ambition. I had to drop that Islamic identity. Speaking of this hero in Sydney, I tell you from personal experience that this man, in that moment, he dropped all his identity. You think when he threw himself in the fire, he was thinking to himself, I am a Muslim or I am an Australian? He dropped his entire interest. He risked his life, his physical body, his future, and he jumped into the fire to stop the killer. At that moment, he did not have any identity. He was pure potential, pure humanity.
This is where Mosab Hasan sounds poetic but slips philosophically. He praises the Sydney hero for dropping identity, then immediately weaponizes identity politics to accuse Muslims of collective guilt and Jews of being unfairly targeted by others. You can't argue identity is irrelevant when it produces heroism, but suddenly essential when assigning blame. That's not moral clarity, that's selective abstraction. Piers subtly lets this breathe because the audience can feel it. Mosab wants Muslims to abandon identity, but he never demands that of his ideological bias dressed up as courage.
This is what we need to see. And after that, people labeled him a Muslim. Why? Because they have guilt. And especially the same crowd that has been demonizing the Jews, those are the ones who found opportunity to identify with heroism. They want it to be heroism when it's convenient, when it suits their narrative. But they did not see the other side, the killer, the embodiment of evil who was shooting civilians. They should identify with the other side, with the dark side, because this is the actual manifestation of their hateful indoctrination over the last 2 years. They have celebrated October 7th. Then they celebrated attacks on civilians in Israel. It was insane to see that celebration against civilians and the indiscriminate attack against civilians. And many of them, by the way, back in the day also celebrated suicide bombing attacks. The problem is not with the Muslims. The problem is with Islam itself.
This is Mosab Hasan's central claim, and it's also his biggest weakness. Here's the hypocrisy laid bare. He insists Islam cannot be reinterpreted while admitting Judaism was reformed, while personally redefining Christianity to mean only what he likes, while rejecting labels except when criticizing Muslims for using them. That's intellectual gerrymandering. Piers doesn't need to shout. He just keeps pointing out that every religion has violent texts, and what matters is how people live, not cherry-picked scripture. Mosab Hasan wants Islam frozen in the 7th century, while granting everyone else historical evolution. That's not analysis, that's ideological bias dressed up as courage.
With jihad itself, and jihad is a unique concept only to the religion of Islam. You cannot find it in Christianity, not in Hinduism. The vast majority of Muslims are peaceful people. They don't want violence. This is human nature is against violence. This is what makes us different than the animals. But the problem, when Muslims identify with Islam, they give cover to the jihadists. And this is the identity crisis within Islam. Many peaceful Muslims identify with Islam, and they could be in the hundreds of millions who don't even know the Quran, who don't know the Islamic law, who don't know that they are actually required for physical and financial and social jihad. If they don't understand it, they go identifying because they think this is their ethnicity, but it's not. It's a label slapped on them. And I think in a moment where they have to choose between the higher interests of humanity or some identity given to them by their parents, they have to choose the higher interests of humanity the same way this hero, Ahmed, in Sydney did.
I think it's a really interesting point because in the moment, he wasn't making calculations about who the intended targets were, who the aggressors were. He was just seeing people getting shot and had a chance to try and stop it. And that was the act of courage. But again, we tend to tar 2 billion people with a sense that they're all in on this kind of thing. Obviously, the vast majority of Muslims are peace-loving people who want nothing to do with this. And the vast majority of victims of Islamist extremism are Muslims, right? So what do we do about this? Going forward, there's no justification for what these people did. Obviously, it was hate-filled and aimed specifically, in this case, at Jewish people. I completely understand why Jewish people around the world feel very scared about this kind of thing happening, particularly off the back of the rising tide of anti-Semitism in the last 2 years. It's been horrific to watch. And again, I think a lot of people are blaming Jewish people for the actions of the Israeli government, which some people support and other people think have gone way too far, and that has inflamed anti-Israeli sentiment, and people conflate Israelis with Jews and so on. And I think there's a lot of that going on too. So there's a lot of hatred. What do we do about this, Mosab? You're in almost a unique position to try and offer a solution. What is the way out of this?
Today's show is sponsored by Oxford Natural, makers of the Optimum Day and Optimum Night all-natural supplements. Thousands of Brits and Americans are already taking them with incredible results. Optimum Day boosts your energy and supports weight loss throughout the day. Optimum Night helps you relax and get deep, refreshing sleep. They have countless success stories, including from some very familiar faces. England legend Michael Owen, who lost £40, AFTV's Robbie, who lost more than £100. To watch their full stories and many more, scan the QR code on your screen or visit oxfordnatural.com/peers. Use the code PEERS and get 70% off your first order. It's a very familiar story when it comes to debt. The banks win, you pay. Fees and phone calls pile up every month unless you fight back. PDS Debt has helped hundreds of thousands of people cut debt and put money back in their pockets. If you're struggling with credit cards, personal loans, and medical bills, PDS offers custom options to help you get out of debt fast. They'll go beyond the numbers to understand your unique situation and craft a personalized plan. There's no minimum credit score, and they have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. Don't wait another month. Take back control in 30 seconds. Get your free personalized assessment and the best option for you at pds.com/peers. That's pdsdebt.com/peers. pdsdebt.com/peers.
Muslims need to overcome their fear of hypothetical entities that don't exist. For example, Muhammad was ahead of his generation. They were justifying killing baby girls, and Muhammad was against it, and he was persecuted because of that. But also he did some aggressive things. He launched jihad against his opponents. And when it came to the Jewish communities of the Arab Peninsula, he wiped them out. And now there are hadiths, for example, in Islam, that calls for the annihilation of the Jewish tribe completely. And it's in the most trusted Islamic sources, and it's confirmed by all the Islamic scholars. Now the thing is, Muslims, it looks like they are incapable of rewriting these laws. Anyone who tried to criticize Islam gets accused with Islamophobia. I am one of them. I have been saying this for many years. And for the last 15 years, since the social media generation, many Muslims have been radicalized because they have access to radical platform. And now the thing is, instead of trying to help the moderate Muslims to overcome their fear and criticize and try to reform Islam, we have been censoring every attempt to criticize Islam. They placed a death sentence over me. The vast majority of Muslims, they don't want me dead. But according to the Islamic law, because I changed my religion or because I renounced Islam, there is a death sentence over my head. So the Islamic law says, Muhammad precisely say, whoever changes his religion, kill him. This is the death sentence that my father validated over my head because I renounced the Islamic violence and the Islamic jihadism. So now, many people don't want to be in my position. It's not a good position because they would be shunned from their families or they would be shamed by the society. They could be labeled as traitors. These are very dangerous labels that most people don't want to have to go through. But at the end of the day, especially Muslims in the West, instead of going against the values of the West or exploiting the values in the West to criticize the West, they should be doing the opposite. They should be trying to help reform Islam. Islam was written in the 7th century. Judaism was written thousands of years ago, but the Jews were able to reform it. There are violent verses in Judaism, but it has been reformed. It has been integrated. And today in the 21st century, we cannot take ideology or a belief system from the 7th century and try to force it into the 21st century.
Yeah, there are people who say that the Quran, for example, gets interpreted and spun deliberately to look like it's inciting violence by those who want to propagate violence. In other words, they twist the meaning of the text to suit their violent intent. The Bible, I'm a Christian, the Bible's full of violence, obviously. But the Quran, comparative to the Bible, is nowhere near as violent. You know, it's just a fact. But it gets twisted and used in a sort of propaganda way as if somehow it is a treaty of violence. isn't that part of the problem? I agree with you about social media. Social media is radicalizing people all over the place, and they may be being educated via social media in a very deliberate, targeted way by those on the extremist edge of this stuff who are saying, look, the Quran makes it crystal clear, you have to do this, and this. Whereas most moderate Muslims I've talked to say that is not what it means at all. It's being twisted and used in a way to encourage violence.
Here is what I think for all the peaceful Muslims who don't choose violence and still identify with Islam without understanding it, I invite them to study what jihad actually means. Many try to explain jihad as inner struggle, but it's not. In the Quran, it's obvious. Jihad is a fundamental pillar in the Islamic belief system. And it's jihad where a Muslim is required to sacrifice himself or herself, if necessary, to establish a global state. It's not the Islamic State that we saw these ugly images coming out of Syria and out of Sydney. It's a global Islamic State where there is only one Islamic ruler. Islam does not believe in diversity or multiplicity. They don't believe in other religions. When Muslims say, La ilaha illallah, it means literally there is no divinity but Allah. This means cancellation of Judaism, of Buddhism, of Hinduism, of Christianity, of all other belief systems, and consider Islam as the only and final belief. This is very, very dangerous, but this is the essence.
In the United States, there are about 5 million Muslims and about 5 million Jews. In the UK, about 5 million Muslims and 250,000 Jews, so very different breakdown. But the reality is, in both countries, that in the majority of cases, you would say there's been pretty good assimilation of both those groups of people into normal society in the United States and the UK. There have been some bad incidents. It seems to me that the majority of Muslims in the US and the UK go about their lives integrated well with the culture and society they live in and don't want to pursue acts of violence. If you take that across the world with 2 billion people, the number of extremists is very small. Otherwise, we'd be seeing a lot more of this stuff going on. So, again, I don't know what the answer is here, but I do know that it's not a case that the majority of Muslims support this or any part of it. And that's my problem with how these incidents blow up. I go on social media and all I see is appalling Islamophobia. I also see a lot of anti-Semitism. I see a lot of hatred generally spewing around. But it just remains clear to me that the vast majority of Muslims do not want to be violent. And yet there is this perception amongst people that the inevitability of a growing Muslim population is they'll want to take over the country. Like in the UK, they want to take us over and they want to instill the Muslim culture over all others, have their own legal system, their own rules, everything else. And I just don't see that. I see bits of that. I see there are certainly some Muslims in the UK that feel that, but the vast majority do not seem to want that. Christmas is peak time for online shopping sprees, but that also means it's peak time for hackers and data brokers who steal your information online. The solution is very simple. Use ExpressVPN to shut them down. Top-tier encryption keeps your activity hidden, even on dodgy public Wi-Fi, which is perfect for holiday travel. You can set your location to 105 different countries, which lets you access content from all over the world. Users save hundreds on streaming and even plane tickets with ExpressVPN, all for $3.49 a month. It's a no-brainer. I use it, and you should too. Right now, you can get an extra 4 months of ExpressVPN if you go to expressvpn.com/peers. That's ExpressVPN's lowest price ever, plus 4 extra months of service. Scan the QR code on the screen or go to expressvpn.com/peers.
Exactly. I think your observation is accurate. It is the truth. But the thing is, why identify with something that you completely oppose? For example, Muslims who don't believe in jihad, It's very similar to meat eaters who identify as vegans. They are not vegans. And the Muslims who don't believe in jihad, basically, they are not Muslims. They are going against the Islamic law. They are going against all the Islamic...
Yeah, but that's the point.
The essence of Islam.
But Mosab,
it's not up to them.
That's the crucial point. Your position is that if you follow the faith of Islam, you automatically have to sign up to violence. From everything I've heard from my moderate Muslim friends, of which I have many, that is not how they interpret Islam. They do not see Islam as a faith that necessitates you being violent. It's the extremists that every religion has, and because there are 2 billion Muslims, there's going to be exponentially more Muslim extremists just simply on numbers, but that they do not see Islam itself as the problem. They see extremism and extremist interpretation of Islam as the problem. And they make a clear delineation, whereas it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your position is anybody that follows the faith of Islam, that they must all follow a path of violence, or they are reneging on what it means to follow Islam.
To identify with something that you don't understand and try to just manipulate it to suit your position, because your perception of yourself that you are a peaceful person, yet you give cover to the jihadists and the bad guys, and you legitimize a belief system that does not believe in others' right to exist. For example, the Prophet Muhammad, when a bunch of Arabians came to him and said, we became Muslims, he said, don't say that you became Muslims. He said, لا تقولوا أسلمنا لا تقولوا آمنا قولوا أسلمنا ولما يدخل الإيمان في قلوبنا. Meaning that you only Muslims. Even Muhammad himself considered Muslim is just a very basic entry level into Islam. But if you really want to look at a bright side, that's Sufism, Sufis. And there are so many Sufi masters in the West, in Europe, also in the East, that actually stay away from politics completely. They withdraw, like the Hanifs, like Muhammad when he abandoned Mecca and went up to the mountain in a long retreat, seeking spirituality, seeking God in devotion. I highly encourage Muslims to do this, to look within and to drop the label, including the Muslim label. What's the point of identifying as a Muslim? Means that you are entitled for something. What do you want in return? First of all, you're a human being. Be a good person. Be like Ahmed. When you see the hateful campaign against the Jewish minority, very productive, very successful people that actually have very good relationship with the Muslims. There are so many Muslims in Israel. There are so many Arabs in Israel, and they have equal rights. They have their mosques. They have even representatives in the Israeli parliament. So Israel and the Jewish people don't look towards the Muslims with hatred. So now when we see the waves, especially after October 7th, spreading hatred against the Jewish people, then I see 2 billion people, let them be even 7 billion people, agreeing on barbarism, then I will have to confront all of them. So why do they identify with something they don't understand? Before they are Muslims, they are humans. We are all children of God. Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindus, we are all expressions of the divine, individualized expressions of the divine. And for us, what we need to find our individuality before we need to hide behind a mask. Actually, if you look at what is a Muslim, can you please help me define a Muslim? What is a Muslim? Can you define it? I bet you won't be able to find a definition for what a Muslim is. So everybody, it's only in their head. And at the end of the day, we think that they are 2 billion, but they are not 2 billion. When I meet a Muslim, as long as they haven't identified as a Muslim, I only see their individuality. I see a human being in front of me. And I am able to communicate with them on a personal level. Now, the moment they raise the religious card, this is when I am concerned. This is when I don't trust that person. But if you really want to be a good person, you don't need to be anybody. You don't need the identity. You can just show me who you are through your practice, not through theories, especially theories from the 7th century. Muhammad showed the entire world through practice.
If I was a Muslim listening to this, I'd say, okay, this guy used to be a Muslim, and he says we shouldn't identify as a Muslim. Okay, that's an argument, but you're a Christian convert. So my immediate response would be, if I was a Muslim, I'd say, well, why do you identify as a Christian then?
This is where Piers quietly destroys the argument. Mosab Hasan spends the entire interview saying, labels are dangerous. Identity is meaningless. Muslims shouldn't identify as Muslims. Then Piers calmly points out, you converted, you were baptized, you're influenced by Christianity. Mosab's response, word salad, spiritual semantics, label evasion. He demands absolute ideological purity from Muslims, but allows himself symbolism, evolution, and personal interpretation. That's the final contradiction, and Piers lets it hang.
If you don't want people to be identified by religious labels, why did you convert to Christianity? Why do you call yourself a Christian? It's the same argument, it's just another religion.
Well, this is basically a label that is given to me.
Let me ask you, are you a Christian?
I am influenced by the teachings of Yeshua. Okay? This is a very different thing. It inspired me, the principle of love thy enemy, of unconditional love, of forgiveness. So these were very important principles when I was finding my way out of them.
But are you a Christian?
But I don't identify as a Christian. Because what is Christian? What denomination? What book? What fellowship? If to identify as a Christian, it could be anything. It could be dream.
But my question, Mosab, why were you baptized in 2004 as a Christian?
It was a symbolic thing.
But
it
why?
Was a symbolic
why would you
thing.
do that?
I did not. It was symbolic. It was a symbolic event. It
symbolic
was a closing
of what?
chapter.
Symbolic of becoming a Christian. That's why you do it.
No, baptism for me, it was symbolic. I get baptized every day. I have been a yoga practitioner for almost 15 years.
Piers Morgan wins by consistency. Mosab Hasan loses by overreaching. Mosab Hasan's critique of extremism is valid. His concern about antisemitism is justified, but his conclusion that Islam itself is uniquely irredeemable collapses under scrutiny. You cannot argue against religious absolutism while practicing your own. And that's exactly what happens here. This wasn't Piers shouting someone down. This was Piers letting logic do the work. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more content like this. Thank you.